I will turn it over to Kenny to tell us what the program's about.
Thank you very much, Bob. Let's see, I'm not quite sure which glasses I should put on, my driving glasses or my reading glasses. But since I'm looking out at the audience right now, I'll wear my driving glasses. I'm so pleased to see so many people in attendance tonight. We've had to turn away people. I can't recall that we've ever had a presentation where we turned away people, but I find that very encouraging nevertheless. However, at this address right here, that is the address of our YouTube channel, and we're recording tonight, and that will be published on YouTube probably in a week or so. And so for friends that may have missed tonight's presentation, just simply direct them to that channel, and they'll be able to watch it at home. There's a couple of things I want to say before I begin. First of all, I'd like to do a quick survey. How many are attending tonight that this is the first time that they've attended a Historical Society presentation? Oh, that's well over half the class. Well, rather half the room. That's as encouraging as well. I'm glad to see that, so many new faces. And it also provides me with the opportunity to invite you to join the Historical Society of Bay County. I'm sure that you would enjoy it. I know that I certainly do. So give that serious consideration. Also, we have a donations box on the table out front. If you find that tonight's presentation was interesting and you enjoyed it, and if you would like to support our organization, please feel free to drop cash into our donation box. Let's see, what else did I want to? That's all I can recall for right now. Typically, when I begin a presentation, I like to start off on a humorous note. It's good for me as a presenter to have a laugh, and it sort of breaks the ice with the audience if I say something humorous. But tonight, I felt like that would be inappropriate. Tonight, we are going to discuss a very sad topic. And for me, I try to keep the fact that 4 people died in the episode that happened at Sandy Creek. 3 families were devastated by that episode, and I think it's best if we all keep that foremost in our mind, even though we're going to be talking about smugglers and litigants and police officers. It's actually the victims that deserve our most sincere attention. So with that, I'll begin the presentation. I see that I failed to set this up properly, and it's not displaying my notes, but that's okay. Since we're recording, I suppose it is a good idea to have the lights off. What do you think, JD? Better to have the lights off? Okay, very good. The incident that we'll be talking about tonight happened in January 23rd, 1977. That was a very, very long time ago. It was just 3 days away from my 25th birthday. That's how very long ago it was. It was an incident that tried our community dearly. It was not only did it affect the families that lost loved ones, but it also tried the community's faith in law enforcement, in the judiciary. It was highly controversial. So many things about that incident seemed to be unfair. And so it was a monumental event. It was, news of it, of course, was published locally. The Gulf Coast State College broadcast the courtroom proceedings live. Channel 7 was there, Channel 13 was there, and of course, journalists for the News Herald was there as well. The trials received notice all throughout the state. Every major newspaper in the state published stories about it, and many of the major newspapers throughout the nation published stories about it. So it was a rather large impact. My source for what I know about Sandy Creek was I learned from reading the 2 Twisted Justice books by Colonel Rube Waddell. Evidently, Colonel Waddell was at some point in time posted at Tyndall Air Force Base, and I got a feeling he probably liked the area and elected to retire here. He built a home at the Sandy Creek Estates. They have a runway. He was a pilot, so having a runway and a strip there that he could land his airplane, small airplane on, appealed to him. In some way, he was able to learn about the Sandy Creek incident that happened. And since he had published a book earlier, he wasn't the first-time author. And when he learned about the Sandy Creek incident, he decided it would be a good thing to investigate it, with the potential of possibly writing a book about it again. Not only did he write about a single book about it, he wrote 2. The first book is primarily about the smuggling operation, and the second book is primarily about the courtroom aspect, and of course the litigants in the trial.
My name is Donald Baldwin. In 1976, I met Bobby Joe Vines. Mr. Vines was a neighbor in the Tallahassee apartment complex where I lived. When Vines learned that I was an agent in the FBI, he began to ask if I would like to know about a marijuana smuggling operation in a nearby county. I ignored his offers for info many times until the day he showed me a bale of pot.
Now, that was not, in fact, Donald Baldwin. That was AI, and I need to say a little bit about that before I proceed. I actually first began to study the Sandy Creek incident about 3 years ago, and I decided to put together a presentation about it. And AI was new at the time, and I wanted to try my hand at AI and see how well I could make that work. So I have a full-length documentary that on the Sandy Creek that I used AI. So you'll see several other clips in the presentation tonight where I've used AI. And I like the aspect of AI because now I put the words in their mouth. I didn't read what they say. I didn't read anywhere. But in my mind, with my creative license, I felt like that I could speak for the individuals at the time. And there will be 4 more clips like you just saw.
As manager of a popular restaurant and lounge in Tallahassee, I made lots of friends. From choir boys to criminals, I met all types. I met David Goodwin there. He was no choir boy. David's trade was smuggling weed, and he was pretty good at it. However, not as good as some other friends of mine. Nevertheless, I knew that one day David Goodwin would help me make a fortune.
Now, I've introduced 2 characters so far, Donald Baldwin and Bobby Joe Vines. Donald Baldwin and Bobby Joe Vines lived in the same apartment complex in Tallahassee. And Bobby Joe Vines was introduced to David Baldwin by his significant other at the time. And when Bobby Joe Vines discovered that Donald Baldwin was a FBI agent, he made the proposal that he become a confidential informant, and that together they could probably put together a marijuana smuggling operation, and by that capture some of the big marijuana smugglers in the area. Matter of fact, there were Floyd Capo in the Tampa area was the one that the FBI had their focus on, and so it seemed like at the time it seemed like a good idea to engage Bobby Joe as a confidential informant. So Bobby Joe had managed to meet Floyd Capo, and Floyd Capo served as the financier for the smuggling operation. He came up with the money to purchase a boat, an old shrimp boat out of Galveston, Texas. The boat was named the Gunsmoke, and the plan was to take the Gunsmoke to Colombia, fill it up with 20 tons of high-grade marijuana, and then pilot the boat back to Bay County through the Intercoastal Waterway up to Sandy Creek, where they had made plans to offload it. On this slide here, that image is not actually the Gunsmoke. That is an AI-produced image, but the photo you see at the lower right, that is in fact a real photo. Those are Florida Marine Patrol officers that had recovered 31 bales of marijuana that got spilled during the offloading operation at Sandy Creek, at the banks of Sandy Creek. So they were floating in the bay. And also there was a John boat that they were using to offload the marijuana that also was sunk at the site, and that was also discovered by the Florida Marine Patrol. Let's see if I can point this out with this pointer. The Gunsmoke came to anchor just off of the Crooked Island Sound. The trip from Columbia to Bay County, to the shores of Bay County, was quite a difficult one for the captain. Peter Van Estrup was the boat captain that piloted the boat from Columbia up to our coast. He ran into a storm in the southern Gulf and made very, very slow progress. But what was worse than that, his fuel consumption doubled. So when they had left Columbia, they had taken on plenty of fuel to make the trip, but what they didn't factor in was bad weather, and the bad weather caused them to use far more fuel than they expected. So when they got to Bay County and just off the shore of Crooked Island Sound, they anchored, and they had to wait for the smuggling team to bring additional fuel before they could bring the Gunsmoke into the bay and along the Intercoastal Canal. So that occurred on a Sunday, and by the time that they got the Gunsmoke refueled and over to Sandy Creek, it was very late Sunday night, nearly midnight. So they followed along the coast, in through the channel, and followed the Intercoastal Canal all the way to Sandy Creek. Now, right here, you may notice there's the mouth to the Crooked Island Sound. This is where some of the smugglers, some of the team, used John boats to ferry the fuel out to the Gunsmoke. Here's the banks of Sandy Creek. This is the offloading site. The smugglers purchased Bobby Joe Vines, I should say. Bobby Joe Vines was pretty much directed the preparations for the smuggling operations. He wasn't the boss on site where the offloading occurred. That was David Capo, the son of Floyd Capo, but Bobby Joe was in charge of making all preparations. One of the things that he did was to buy sheets of 3/4 inch plywood to place down on the beach shore, so that when they offloaded the bales, they wouldn't sit there in the salty water, so the plywood allowed the bales to remain dry. There were actually 17 people involved in the smuggling operation entirely. Not all of them were prosecuted. Many of them were simply had the charges dropped against them. But there were 4 that were primary players in the litigation. Bobby Joe Vines, what you see here, of course, David Goodwin was one of the smugglers. Charles Everett Hughes was a smuggler. Walter Gale Steinhorst, however, was hired by Bobby Joe Vines to be a security guard. He was to be on guard to make sure that no one came driving down that dirt road in the middle of the night. The weather was so bad, it was well below freezing, and no one on the smuggling team expected that anybody would come driving down that dirt road path, but that's not in fact what happened. Much to their surprise, there was a truck with 4 individuals that followed the trail down to where they were. Aboard that truck were 2 sisters, Sandy McAdams and Sheila McAdams. They were 2 teenage sisters, 16 and 14 years old. Harold Sims was the oldest in the group. He was 31 years old, and Douglas Hood was in the truck with a pickup truck with a camper on it, and he joined the 4 as they traveled down that dirt road. It's suggested by many that they actually knew, or at least the men of this group knew what was going on, and that they were there purposely just to blackmail the smugglers, saying, give us a few bales of marijuana and we'll be on our way, and you'll never know we were here. Well, that's not exactly what happened. George Sims, I think George is his, Harold is his common name. When they arrived on the scene, they were met by Walter Gale Steinhorst. Walter Gale Steinhorst told them, this is a police operation, it's a police sting, you need to turn around and leave. And but contrary to what was good advice, they in fact got out of the truck. And when George, or Harold Sims, when he exited the truck, he had taken along a sawed-off shotgun with him. And when he got out of the truck, he fired the shotgun at Walter Gale Steinhorst, missing him. Walter Gale Steinhorst returned fire, shot him in the heart, and killed him instantly. Now, these 2 articles that you see here were published in the News Herald. The first article on the left was published about a week after the incident, and they were concerned about the sisters missing, and I suppose they weren't, even though the 2 men were missing at the same time, it was the sisters that received notice in the newspaper. The article you see on the right was published in August 5th, 1977, and quite coincidentally, within days of this article being published, the bodies were discovered in a sinkhole in Taylor County. The FBI knew right away what had happened there, and the reason why they discovered that sunken boat that there at the beach just offshore, and when they tracked down that boat to determine who had purchased it, turned out that Bobby Joe Vines had purchased it. And so right off the bat, they had really good information as to what was really happening, but they just sat on it. They did nothing for almost 9 months. After the four individuals were shot, not after they were shot, after the Sims was shot and placed in a van that was on site, the two girls and Hood were tied up. Steinhorst tied them up with an old T-shirt that he found in the van, and the plan was that they would be among the smugglers. They agreed that they would be driven to a remote location far deep into the woods somewhere and then let go. Well, after the bodies were discovered and Bobby Joe Vines was arrested as a primary suspect, of course, he began to describe the operation to the FBI, and with that, they had the information that they needed to arrest many of the individuals that participated. The original trial was in Tallahassee, and the trial in Tallahassee was just about smuggling, not about the murders, but only about smuggling. Many of the litigants in that case were found innocent. David Goodwin was found innocent. Steinhorst was found innocent. Many were found innocent. There were some, however, that were determined to be guilty of smuggling and were sentenced for that. Bobby Joe Vines testified in every trial regarding the incident. You can see him here on the stand. He was initially granted, from the very beginning, he was granted immunity by the FBI, an across-the-board immunity. And then when he was indicted in Bay County, the state attorney also granted him an immunity. And he was granted immunity in order that he would spill the beans on all of his fellow conspirators. He agreed to that, and that's precisely what he did.
As grand jury foreman, I reported to the court that many members of the grand jury were upset with the state attorney's office for offering plea deals to so many of the defendants. I told the court that there was a boatload of evidence to warrant prosecution of all the alleged participants in the smuggling operation. Also, many grand jury members were very critical of the FBI and the Florida Department of Law Enforcement for failing to communicate with local law enforcement.
So Leo Jones, the state's attorney, he offered immunity to almost everybody that had been on trial. In the end, only three of the smugglers would go to trial for murder: David Monroe Goodwin, Walter Gale Steinhorst, and Charles Everett Hughes. Now, somehow Charles Everett Hughes got wind of the impending arrest, and he took off and was a fugitive, and lived almost 4 years in Mississippi before he was discovered, captured, and brought back to Bay County. So he was tried and convicted many years later than the initial litigants. The verdict in 78, Steinhorst was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to die by electrocution. He was on death row for quite a number of years, and he died of natural causes, complications of diabetes, in 1999. Charles Hughes was returned to Bay County in 1981 and was convicted on 3 counts of third-degree murder and sentenced to 15 years in prison. He, however, served less than 5. He served 4.5 years. And David Monroe Goodwin was found guilty of 3 counts. I have first-degree murder here, but in fact it was 3 counts of third-degree murder. Was it first-degree? Okay. And sentenced to death by electrocution. In 1981, his sentence was vacated to life in prison, and he was paroled in 2017 at the age of 70. Now, David Goodwin was a mile and a half away from the first shooting incident, nowhere near the site. David Goodwin insisted that the kidnapped victims be taken somewhere in the woods and set free. There was never any insistence by him that they be harmed in any way. He, however, was convicted and sentenced to the electric chair. His sentence was vacated, and instead of being retried, which in my mind would have been the right thing to do, send him back to Bay County to be retried, he was nevertheless, the sentence was vacated, and he was instead given a life sentence. Now, there's a number of people in the community that became advocates for David Goodwin. The Reverend Henry Hazard is one of the ones you can see here, where he signed an endorsement asking, or he was among many that were seeking the parole for David Goodwin. Not only Henry Hazard, but also Lavelle Pitts. Now, Lavelle Pitts had been among the investigation. He had been part of the recovery for the bales of marijuana that was spilled out. Also, he directed the dive team that went down and dove on the wreck of the Gunsmoke. Some of the remaining smugglers took the Gunsmoke back out of St. Andrew Bay. They drove it down the Gulf Coast to just off the shore, I think 17 miles offshore of St. Pete, and sunk it in 80 foot of water. It took quite a bit of investigation to find it. Matter of fact, NOAA, the federal agency, the weather agency, was engaged to help find the Gunsmoke. It was eventually located and investigated. Of course, some of the pot was removed from it as well. Since the murders have received such widespread publicity locally, statewide, and throughout the nation, it had quite an impact on the judiciary. It's okay, Butch. So it was an impactful event. It changed the way life sentences and death sentences are reviewed in the state of Florida. In particular, it had an effect on law enforcement accountability. You may have noticed that the foreman of the grand jury was quite upset that the law enforcement, FBI in particular, didn't communicate with the Bay County Sheriff's Office. So there was a lot of things regarding the trial that was unfair. In my mind, the greatest injustice about the trial and the outcome was the sentences that were given to the litigants. Charles Hughes, who had tied cinder blocks to the bodies and pushed them into the watering hole sink, only received a 15-year sentence, and he served less than 5 years. Of course, Steinhorst probably deserved what he got with his sentence of death by electrocution, even though he died of natural causes. But David Monroe Goodwin received a life sentence for murders that he was a mile and a half away from the initial gunshot that killed Sims, and he was 150 miles away when Steinhorst cold-blooded murdered the kidnapped victims in Taylor County. Tonight, I've abbreviated. I know you see. I know that you can tell that I'm skimming through this rather quickly. When I presented this particular case at Gulf Coast, I would spend well over an hour presenting the program. Tonight, I'm trying to zip through it as quickly as I can, and I see that I've already taken too much time because we have 3 very special guest speakers tonight. I want to go back up one to this particular slide because I overlooked something. On this particular side, the young fellow, 16-year-old fellow at the bottom right of this slide, that's Lamar English. Lamar English was a sport diver. Him and his best friend decided one Sunday afternoon that they would dive the watering hole sink and look for arrowheads. And instead of finding arrowheads, they found the bones and remains of 4 bodies. So tonight, the first guest speaker that I guess we could call them secret guest speakers is in fact Lamar English. So Lamar, I'd like to call you up now. And Lamar, I've allotted him 10 minutes to tell you his story of diving and finding the bodies on the watering hole sink. Thanks, Lamar.
Thank you, sir. 10 minutes ain't much time to tell y'all what happened. So listen fast. I was 16 years old, had been driving maybe 6 months. G.W. Pridgeon and I had been spending a lot of time in the Osceola River looking for arrowheads. And on August the 7th, 1977, we had planned to make 2 dives, one in the river and one in that sinkhole. And we never made it to the river. At 2:15, we had geared up and got in the water at watering hole sink. And whenever we submerged, at 30 foot, you just barely could make out an orange glow of the sun overhead. We had like 2 foot visibility. And at 2:20, we tied off a guideline to a palm tree log jutting out of the wall of the sinkhole. It was a vertical drop. And at 40 foot, something caught my eye. We were there was a ledge and there was a concrete block. And I said, well, that's odd. And right next to it was another cement block. And then to the left of that was some rounded off form that I couldn't really identify. I saw like one vertebrae and like a bone sticking up. I said, well, that's odd, and I don't know what I'm looking at, so I swam up over that a little bit. And there's another concrete block, and nothing made sense. Now remember, we got 2 foot visibility. In life, there's a personal space, about 4 foot if you're talking to somebody, maybe 3 foot, 2 foot if you're family. Well, something caught my eye to the left of that 3rd concrete block, and it was a human skull with a red and white handkerchief, obviously stuffed down the mouth, jaws wide open, and there's a hole about the size of a quarter over the right eye socket. Newspaper reporters don't always get everything right. 2 days later in the Tallahassee Democrat, there's a quote by my diving buddy, G.W. Pridgeon, and I have it memorized, and it goes, G.W. said, I heard Lamar make some kind of a funny noise. That is accurate. Because, and got 2 foot visibility and one flashlight that had a 6-volt spring terminal battery in it that had about the same lumen output as a standard mason jar with about 15 lightning bugs or fireflies in it. It ain't very bright. So, like I said, this is 1977. In 1975, a movie named Jaws come out. And if y'all remember, when Hooper got in the water, when they found Ben Gardner's boat, at night he's got a flashlight, swims up to this boat. Ooh, there's a great white tooth. Let's get that. And then the next thing you know, he drops his light, his knife, the shark tooth, and goes, bah! Well, that's basically what I did. Because that wasn't in the program, you know. It was like, GW heard Lamar make a funny noise, so he turned to see what the deal was, and I got the light, like right there. His eyes got this big around, and we went same time. Yeah, we come to the surface. We had been in the water less than 10 minutes. And we briefly discussed it, and we decided to run the guideline from the surface back down to the body so the Sheriff's Department dive team could go take care of business. At 2:30, we were in the truck headed to Perry to get the sheriff. We got out of that water and unloaded gear in record time, and we're on the way to get the sheriff. But I specifically remember closing the driver's door. When I got out of the water, the door's open. And all of a sudden, every tree you look at, somebody just ducked behind that tree. You know, imagination is at warp speed. And just like Mike Nelson from Sea Hunt, I had a dive knife about this long, and it was sitting in the seat of the truck between me and GW. And on the way to Perry, there's this big lime rock mine. GW says, "You want to let's stop there and call the sheriff?" I said, "Well, what if they put them in there?" He said, "Keep driving." And that's what happened. We get to Perry to the jail because it's Sunday afternoon. Maybe the sheriff's at the jail. Well, we go into the jail, and the jailer is in a chair with his feet propped up on the desk. Ain't much going on in Perry Sunday afternoon. And we walk in. I'm still in my wetsuit, but I got a t-shirt on. GW's in the shorts and a t-shirt. And I walk in there, so we need to see the sheriff. Well, the jailer is Barney Fife, reincarnated. He stands up, hitches his breast, is like, "Sheriff's out of town. What can I do for you boys?" "Well, we need to report a murder." And he went, "A murder? Hold on, I'll get somebody." And he was gone and came back in a couple of minutes. And as a plainclothes investigator and a uniformed deputy, and they took us to an interrogation room and set us down. There were like a table, had about 3 chairs on either side, has a phone on it and an ashtray. And we told them what we found. And they just looking at us and go, "Okay, you boys sit tight." So we were sitting tight, and they disappeared. In about 10 minutes, they come back, sat down across from us again, and investigator says, "How much air you boys got?" I said, "A bunch. We weren't down long, and plus we got another full tank apiece." And he said, "Good." He grabbed that phone, turned it around, and shoved it in our direction and said, "You boys call your mamas and tell them you're going to be home late, because we're going to go back and bring up whatever it is you think you found." And I didn't know it, but I have a built-in mute system that went into emergency shut-up mode, and I didn't say anything. GW said, "Y'all need to call Leon County. They got a dive team for such as this. Sergeant Al McDermott is the head of it." I'm going, "Tell him, G." And they said, "No. We can handle this right here ourselves. Now you boys make the calls." At this point, my brain turned to mush. Just, I had the thought that we could be doing the body recovery hadn't even crossed my mind. Like I said, I'm 16. And so GW grabbed the phone, and I'm just sitting there going, "Well, Daddy's out of town. He was on a weekend fishing trip. I ain't at home, so it's either going to be my sister or my mama. My sister was 2 years older. And she answered the phone. And I said, I need to talk to Mama. She goes, I thought you were diving. I said, I was diving. Now I'm not, but I need to talk to Mama. And she goes, she's busy. I'll give her a message. I said, let me talk to Mama. She goes, I'll give her a message. Well, I paused 2 or 3 seconds, gathered my thoughts. I said, okay. Tell them at the jail in Perry, we found somebody's been murdered. They don't believe us. Got to do a body recovery. Going to be home late. Bye. And when Sandy relayed the message, Mama understood 3 words: Lamar, jail, murder. And so I spent a few minutes saying, I'm at the jail, not in the jail. There's a big difference. This ain't my one phone call, you know. And it's just like, this can't be happening. This don't happen. This is 1977. Jimmy Carter's in office. Bear Bryant's still a coach at Alabama and would be for 5 more years. Bobby Bowden just started at FSU the previous year. The gas is 66 cents a gallon, and the internet didn't exist, nor did cell phones, so this was my one shot to talk to Mama and all that. And then we headed back to Watering Hole Sink. The sheriff deputy, the plainclothes investigator, and an African-American Perry city policeman. We all went back to the sinkhole, and on the way, the investigator remembered somebody that had a closed-circuit TV camera system for inspecting agricultural wells. You know, them big old 8, 10, 12-inch wells. Anyway, he had this system in a van, and they called him, and he met us there at the sinkhole. GW and I geared up again, got back in the water, and they were parked right at the edge of the sinkhole, and there was a crane on there, and they boomed the crane out, and they had this camera that was about this long and that big around, and stainless steel, and weighed about 50 pounds in the water. They lowered that down into the water, and we got it, and let's see, down we went. We crashed into that ledge at 40 foot, so I've got this camera in a headlock, you know, trying to film this, and we come up, and they go, you're moving it too fast, go back down. So, okay, round 2, we come up, and the investigator comes back out, and he goes, that's somebody. And we're going, we've been trying to tell y'all that for about 3 hours now. So they used our guideline to pull up the concrete blocks. There were 2 around the ankles, 2 around the waist, and 1 around the neck. And well, what we gonna put him in, you know? They ain't brought a body bag, they ain't called an ambulance or hearse or nothing. They just did not believe us, period. But now all of a sudden they do. They threw my diving gear bag, equipment bag, into the sinkhole, and I said, nope, put that back in the truck, it'll smell bad. Negotiations ensued, and I was promised a new dive gear bag and kind of wanted if we could just use this to, okay, I'm good with that. So we got the blocks up and all, and I grabbed the middle button and lifted the upper half of the first body, placed it in my gear bag, zipped it up, surfaced. GW popped up, and here's a croaker sack or something, might have the murder weapon in it. Well, he had brown corduroy breeches with a boot sticking out the other end. That was the other half of the first person. And I say, all right, here's the upper half. I'm going back to get the lower half. And don't have a guideline. It's 7:30, 8 o'clock at night by now. I overshot the ledge, and down I'm going, and I gently stopped on the bottom. I looked to my right. There's a pair of legs there, and white tennis shoes, about that long, had a red and blue stripe on either side. Trax tennis shoes. They weren't very big. I looked to my left, and there's another set of legs with work boots. And for the only time in my life, I muttered to myself, these are the wrong legs. I looked at my gauge, I'm at 55 feet. The legs I'm looking for are at 45 feet. So what turned into them not believing us about one body, now they're three. So I come up, I said, I got bad news and worse news. What's bad news? I couldn't find the other half of the first guy. Well, your buddy brought that up. And I said, and I found two more pair of legs. And then reality, set in. The mood changed a lot because they weren't expecting one, and now they got three bodies, all shot and tied to concrete blocks. At that point, they decided, well, I think it's time to call in the Leon County Dive Team and FDLE and everybody and the brother. And when they come up out of the edge of the water, they were carrying the gear bag up, and they got up to where they were parked, and they just simultaneously dropped it and started losing the cookies. It was a pretty intense smell. And then the big argument ensued about whose patrol car the body's going into. And it got heated real quick. In reality, we winded up taking the body to the morgue on the tailgate of my dad's hunting truck. And on the way to Perry, to the hospital, to the morgue, it's just like I was trapped in my own personal episode of The Twilight Zone. I'm supposed to be at Cherry Lake having Sunday dinner with my girlfriend and her family, and no, I'm driving down Highway 98 with a 3-car police escort and a dead guy in my gear bag going to the morgue. It was just, you can't make this up. So we go to the morgue, we drop that off, and then they go, look, we don't know what or whom this involves, so don't say nothing to anybody. But can y'all be back at the sinkhole at 8 o'clock in the morning and run the guideline down to the other body? Yeah, we can do that. And it's, 8:30 at night. We hadn't eaten anything, so we'd go to McDonald's. 3 steps into McDonald's. GW, Lamar, oh my God, we heard what happened. Are y'all okay? And they apparently forgot they told us, tell our mamas what happened. Well, GW's mom was a city manager. My mom worked at the post office. They knew everybody. The woman speaking to us, her and her husband had a little dive shop in their garage. We got air there to go fill up our tanks to go diving in the river looking for airheads. And so go home, go to Greenville. It's 25 miles to Greenville. Drop GW off, and I'm headed home. My dad's home from his fishing trip by now. Where's Lamar? Well, last we heard, he's at jail in Perry. And what did my boy do? So anyway, home was about 5 miles outside of Greenville, up the hill, down the hill at the turn. I'm home. When I crested that hill, I met a truck, and it kicked up a rock about the size of a baseball, and where did it hit? Right in front of my face, and it took the windshield out. I think I'm being shot. I'm looking for blood. It don't hurt that bad, really, but I pull up at the house. I walk in the back door, and they looking at me like I got 3 heads. I said, y'all ain't gonna believe what happened to me. And so I sat down at the table, and for the next 45 minutes to an hour, I told them in detail what happened. And Daddy said, you need to go write everything that happened down because you're going to have to testify in court. And I did that. And then I took a long shower. And I stayed under that shower until it ran out of hot water because you can imagine. So the next day we go to the sinkhole. And it was obvious that the don't tell anybody anything had been rescinded because there were like 100 reporters and people there from every news agency in Florida. And that is what August the 7th, 1977 was from my perspective. Yeah. It was crazy.
That's quite an adventure, particularly considering you were only 16 years old.
Yeah.
Our next featured guest has a long and illustrious career. He began his professional career as FBI. Forensic scientist with the FBI. He soon left the FBI after a few years and joined the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. There he had very several decades long career, and he retired as chief of staff and inspector general of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. Today, he's the president and CEO of the Integrity. The Integrity Group is a group that advocates for natural disaster victims. His company is extremely successful in what they do. After Hurricane Michael, they managed to recover almost $5 billion for victims of Hurricane Michael back in 2018. So it's my pleasure to introduce Gary Yates.
Thank you, Kenny. Is my mic working? Can you folks hear me? Yeah. Okay. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you guys tonight. I am a little disappointed, however, that I got to follow Lamar because I may not be quite as entertaining. The only thing I thought about I could say is when I came to FDLE from the FBI, I was supposed to start to work on a Monday morning, and a particular Sunday morning, I got a knock on the door. I need to go to a crime scene called the Chi Omega house that Ted Bundy had visited. We didn't know it was Ted Bundy, but that was my intro. I left the big city of Washington and came to little Tallahassee to a mass murder. But we won't talk about that because we won't talk about the Sandy Creek. I am a native of Bay County, and I look around this room, there's some of you guys that might be almost as old as I am. So any of you remember the Yates family shoe store on East Business 98? That was my mom's shoe store. Every Wednesday morning she was on Daybusters, Mama Yates, selling shoes. And what's interesting, anybody remember Yates family shoe store? All right, good. All right, thank you. You probably fed me some evenings. My mom and dad have both passed away, of course, but years later we talked about Sandy Creek and the families involved, and she pointed out to me that all of the families involved in this thing were customers of the shoe store, and before that she was in the grocery business as well. And I never talk about this case without, as was said earlier, as Kenny said earlier, we need to remember the 4 victims, especially, frankly, in my opinion, the 16-year-old, 14-year-old girl, the McAdams sisters. Horrible, horrible crime. My first interaction with Sandy Creek was I was baptized there when I was like 11 years old. Anybody else baptized in Sandy Creek? Probably not. Okay, I guess I won't see you guys in heaven then, because but there's a lot of linkage between my life and David Goodwin's life. Not only the family relations, as we weren't big buddies. He's a little bit older than I am. He was my brother's age at Rutherford and Everett Junior High. I was a little bit younger, but he took a path. He made decisions that took him to where he was for over 40 years. I made decisions, and by the grace of God, good luck and God's grace, I was able to do some really neat things with the FBI and with FDLE. But what we realize now, frankly, is God has a plan for everybody. And if you ever hear David speak, and maybe you will soon, he will talk about what he did in prison, which is incredible in terms of the impact that he had on men that were looking for a mentor and a godly figure to help them through their trying time. And I will say that I'm gonna try to keep mine short because Lamar went too long. No, I'm just kidding. just kidding. I was with the FBI through until 1978 when I moved to the Chi Omega House, in Tallahassee. But I had a really, really close friend who was in the director of Clarence Kelly's office. And we always talked. I was into political stuff and going to school up there and learning stuff. And there were all kind of meetings in 1975, 76 about the FBI needed to get into major drug importation business. Why was that? Because the DEA was just emerging, okay? And they were starting to get those things the FBI craves, which are headlines, big cases, okay? So I'm aware, I was not invited to any of those meetings, but I'm aware of the meetings, and I've seen some documentation where they were talking about the new mission of the FBI as far as drugs go. And then in early 76, mid-76, a memorandum was sent to a lot of the FBI regional offices, including Jacksonville, which was the supervisory agency over the Tallahassee field office. That's important. And it was basically saying, you need to start working major drugs. Unfortunately, that didn't go along with proper training, proper policies on how to deal with confidential informants, how to manage international cases. It was just, frankly, we need to get these cases and get the headlines. And with all due, and I have many, many friends who, most of them are retired now, but were FBI agents and quality people. But frankly, leadership at the FBI, even in recent history, has had some real problems. And the J. Edgar Hoover mentality was, we're number one, we do whatever we want. And this was just after Hoover died, and there were a lot of Hoover people still running that place. So bottom line is, the FBI directed, inappropriately in my view, the Bureau to start working major drug cases. So a little bit later that year, just coincidentally, an FBI agent in Tallahassee, Don Baldwin, who I knew, he's a really nice guy. He's now passed away. But he was, in a medical community, if you wanted a surgeon, Don Baldwin was not the surgeon. He might have been the guy working in the back of the hospital. He was not a real strong agent from an investigative perspective. Everyone knew that. So Don came to FDLE to a guy named Eddie Boone, who later became the sheriff of Leon County when he left FDLE, and said, hey, we need to start working some drug cases, kind of ride along with you guys. And Eddie reluctantly sort of said, yeah, come on out, we're doing an airstrip in, I think it was Dixie County. Come on out and you can watch us or whatever. So it was a successful takedown of a plane coming in full of dope. And the supervisor, not Eddie, but the supervisor on the field said, okay, Don, why don't you bag and tag this one? We'll take the other three. So Don said, okay. So everybody that watches TV knows when a cop bags and tags somebody, they frisk them, they check for any foreign objects, any substances, put handcuffs behind their back, not in the front. And so our guys sort of trusted the FBI agent to know what he was doing. Unfortunately, he didn't. And when they got to Leon County Jail to book them, the agent brought in this particular suspect, and the jailer said, oh my God, he's got a gun. He had a gun, and luckily he didn't pull it and kill several people. That would have been horrendous, obviously. So we filed a complaint with the FBI. They didn't do anything about it, zip about it, okay? about just a few months after, this is very coincidental, but very telling. A few months after that, a guy named Bobby Joe Vines comes to FDLE and says, "Hey, I want to be a confidential source for you guys. I've got some information on a Colombian drug smuggling deal, and I want to sign up to be a confidential source." So the agent that he talked to, I can't remember his name, took his information, got some information, and then following FDLE policy, vetted him, criminal history check, records check, a financial check, and came to the conclusion, you don't make it with us, and notified Bobby Joe Vines, we're not going to be able to use you. 2 weeks later, guess where he went? FBI Don Baldwin. Yeah, let's love it. We love it. And then after that interaction, they signed him up, no vetting or anything. There were meetings again at the Hoover Building in Washington, where the special agent in charge from Jacksonville, Nebris, was reporting to not to Kelly, but to his number 2 people up there, that there was a big drug case going to be worked in North Florida, and that it may be the world's record largest, tonnage or whatever. And the folks in Washington said, "Yeah, good luck." So this is the ineptitude, frankly, of the FBI debacle. So the case happened. There's everything, anybody got law enforcement experience in here, the fact that you run this thing the way it was run, with no real security, no real linkage of officers around the perimeters, those kind of things. It was a debacle. It was a true debacle. And then what really makes it very disturbing is not until 9 months later, when Lamar and his friend find the bodies in a sinkhole, did they tell anybody or do anything. There's a Florida Times Union newspaper article where Nebris says, "We knew nothing about any kind of drug smuggling case in Jacksonville." Thank you, sir. Is this water or something stronger? So, thank you. So, big debacle. Frankly, like I said, I'm not here just to blast the FBI, but I got to on this case. I think they learned a lesson. By the way, maybe Kenny will provide this to y'all. FDLE recently did a 4-episode series. It's called the War on Miami, and it's about drug smuggling, the cartels, Pablo Escobar, the violence in Miami. They asked me to participate in that a little bit. I do look a little bit fat on TV, so you have to ignore that. But it's one of the 4th episode that's coming out within the next month or so is going to talk about lessons learned. And I actually mentioned Sandy Creek, and we used it at FDLE as the example of how not to do multi-tonnage, large-scale drug smuggling. It was a horrendous mistake. That's the one thing, frankly, I agree with Leo Jones on. He blamed FDLE, which was not appropriate, because FDLE didn't do anything until the bodies were found. We knew nothing about this. But I agree with Mr. Jones' assessment that the FBI had really screwed up this operation. Okay, so the other debacle that I will mention, however, is I think sort of similar to the FBI wanting headlines and looking strong and being good and being better than the DEA. I think Mr. Jones was under pressure. He only had 1 conviction. There were 4 dead people. I don't know why all these people were granted immunity, but he was very anxious to get a big conviction. Honestly, I don't know how a Supreme Court justice wound up presiding over the Steinhorst and the Goodwin trials. The law allows that, but that's the only 2 trials in the history of Florida where a Supreme Court judge did that. And maybe someone can tell me the rationale for that. Yes, legally, the fact that David Goodwin was part of this organization, you could really stretch that to in my view and other prosecutors I talked about, a second or third degree murder charge, because he was not at the scene of any murder. He was actually coerced to do some things that were alleged to support the true killer, which was Walter Steinhorst. So I got to be critical of Mr. Jones and how that was done. And then it also was sort of distressing in looking at it that the jury recommended life in prison. Kenny mentioned that. Their recommendation was life in prison, and Judge Atkins said, no, I'm going to give you the death penalty. That now is illegal. 3 or 4 years ago, law was passed that a judge can't even do that. And I think Judge Atkins later indicated regret in doing that. So David Goodwin wound up spending 3.5 years on death row. Some of that time, by the way, was right beside Ted Bundy. So I've talked with David and learned a lot about Ted Bundy that I didn't even know when I was involved with Ted Bundy. So that's sort of an interesting little connection there. But his sentence was commuted to life in prison. I really thought back when I first heard that happen, okay, well, he'll have to serve a total of at least 25 years, and he was already, 10 years into the sentence. But he went for parole and was getting denied. So in mid-2016, Lisa and I, we have a house out at the beach. This is our part-time residents of Bay County. We were watching Channel 7, and they had a thing called Whatever Happened To. And it was Whatever Happened to Sandy Creek. And Rube Waddell, who the author of the books, was interviewed. And I said, holy crap, he's still in prison. So the next day I called Rube and I said, hey, I need to get with you. So I got with the Rube and we compared notes, and I got real energized and went to FDLE and looked at piles of records that thick on this case, looked at the court transcripts and everything. And then I got the former commissioner of FDLE, 2 former sheriffs, and some other key folks to join me and go. First time I'd ever testified at an offender review commission meeting. I never asked for people to get paroled until David Goodwin. So I'm very proud that we were able to go down there and do that. And in, I think, May of 2017, David was released after over 40 years in prison. He called me, or his daughter called me a couple of days after he was released from Everglades Correctional, which, by the way, is about 30 miles from Alligator Alcatraz down there. And you hear people talk about how horrible Alligator Alcatraz is. I think if you ask anybody in Everglades prison, they would rather be at Alligator Alcatraz. Air conditioning, better food. It's, the state prison system is not a place to be. First of all, none of them are air conditioned. I don't know if y'all know that. Or very few of them are even air conditioned. So anyway, we were very proud of the part we played in securing his parole. And frankly, I'm even more proud that I've got to know him a little bit, that he did not come out remorseful or angry. He's not suing the state or anybody. He is resolved to the fact it was God's plan, and that he now has a platform to talk to young people and older people about decisions. Because he will admit, he made a decision that got him here, got him in that situation. So I think I'll cut it short there, Kenny, and I don't want to keep these people all night because there's a big thunderstorm out there, I think, brewing. So we might have to stay all night. But anyway, thank you very much. Thank you, Kenny.
Our last also a Panama City native. He's the 1964 graduate of London High School. I'm sure he's proud to be a Rutherford Graham.
Amen.
Amen.
Initially, he graduated from FSU, cum laude, in 1975. Wasn't long after that that he spent 3.5 years on the death row. So if you would please welcome David Goodwin.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you all for coming out. My name is David Goodwin, and first and foremost, as always, remembering victims. Kenny brought it up. Gary did. There's not a day I don't think about. Sandra and Sheila McAdam, Douglas Hood, and even the other guy who I wasn't charged with. I was sharing in what's called victim awareness classes I had to go through at the Everglades in order to be paroled. Long-term incarcerated people do not automatically get paroled or get out. But they go through a program called Dr. Regina B. Sheeran's Corrections Transition Program. I was there over 5 years, classes all the time. One of the main one of the classes, and I taught, was victim awareness. It's being able to put yourself in the victim's shoes. And not just the person that is directly impacted, but communities, law enforcement, a trickle-down effect that went all over the United States. It was in the USA today. Back then, it was just the biggest thing that happened. And it was a horrible event that shaped my life and changed it in many ways. But one of the best is coming to understand that the Christian home I was raised in and brought up in the Springfield Community Church, for any of y'all who've been around here, it was known as Brother Hunt's, a Pentecostal. I drifted far from that. I never did like alcohol, still don't mess with it. But after I hurt my back, I got an opportunity to smoke marijuana at Gulf Coast Junior College in 1971. I would go on from there to meet people who some may, or the locals here would remember. It was called the Panama City Mexican Connection in 75 or 76 maybe. They had caught coming into this area from Mexico and had 2 law enforcement officers that worked for the Bay County Sheriff's Department that escorted them through Florida once they got into Panama City, Bay County. It was a big case, so I knew these guys. A remark that I was a smuggler was not the case. I went one time to Brownsville with another guy that fell on that case, and we brought 100 pounds back. They would soon get arrested, and they would go on and get 1.5 to 2 years. When I was in my master program at FSU, my whole intent was to go on to law school. I had been accepted at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, New Mexico, contingent upon getting my master's degree. And I found that that was kicking my end, the master degree work. The first 4 is not too bad, but master work, it was a lot. And we were cramming it into 4 quarters, a special program because of my graduating with grade point average being cum laude. But I knew I couldn't make it. I had hurt my back working at Tyndall Field, had surgery in 1970, and that would lead me to going back to college later and my use of marijuana. So I didn't smuggle, but I knew about it and went out there and knew where it was going on through those people. Then I meet this idiot, Bobby Joe Vines. A woman that he was staying with, an apartment complex, had 2 children, and my wife and us, we had 2 children. And she had got friendly with her, and I meet this idiot, and he was known as Lying Bob, because there's a guy here, still unknown, in Bay County that I knew that was involved, drove Cadillac, and wore suits. We called them high rolling Bob. To differentiate between them, Bob Vines was known as Lion Bob. High rolling Bob here. I was Little Dave, Big Dave, Capo. He was a big man. I'm not that big. So we got little names that we were using, and we get this thing going together, and I get involved. I have not been a smuggler. I was not doing any big smuggling. If they ever tell you that you don't get busted the first time, ball lie. I can tell you now before God, and I always speak of God. That's the part I really want to come to, because my whole thing is that despite all of the tragedy of this case, and it was so bad at one time at parole hearings, it kept dragging on. I had 8 before Gary and some others showed up. The one before the last one, my daughter came to visit me at Everglades, and she said she was in tears. She nearly had an emotional breakdown. She said, "Daddy," they said they wanted you to rot in there. That was a victim's family. My classes, I told her, "Baby, they've got that right. They've got that right." I am well aware of how much damage was done through the loss of lives. But God has taken my life and made it into something that I would have never imagined, certainly didn't at that time. But when you got 3 death sentences, you start reviewing your options about what the hereafter might be like. And so I did. And that was like 3 years. I'm reading the Bible all the time, I'm studying, and I finally found that it wasn't all that I thought. And I made a prayer at about 3 years. God, show me what you would want, what you want in me, and I'll do it. It would be about 20 years that I had one leg on one side of the fence and one on the other, because when you live in the places I lived in, one of the things that kept me incarcerated was disciplinary reports, called DRs. Armed assault, attempted armed assault, fighting. A little white guy with money in a prison system better learn how to fight. And not just fight, because they don't care about fighting. You got to make them believe that you'll kill them. And I did all that. So I was on both sides, but after about 20 years, standing at Rayford in a cell one day, I was doing my devotional time, studying, just all into this stuff. But I get this feeling with God, they just want more out of me, and I told him. I looked up, and I said, I'm doing more than most on the front pews of the churches now. I'll give you a half a day. I got a Greek lexicon, Hebrew lexicon. I started studying and reading. And I came to the conclusion that there is a God. He is real and He's fully in charge. Not everyone will believe like I do this day and time, but I'm principally Presbyterian. I believe God is God. He either ordains or permits things to happen that He works out for good. Romans 8:28, everybody loves it. But they hesitate when everything gets rough. Well, Moses went around that mountain 40 years, walking in camel dung and wondering what his life had came to before God fulfilled His plan. And this man, having been raised in the Pharaoh Empire, the ability to read and write and do things, that he would be the one to lead Israel into where they now have their nation. Joseph is my favorite. 17 years. They figured, 13 years. He was 17, we get an age when he's going out to his brothers. 30, he goes to the throne. He's down there going through everything. His brothers have done sold him. It is not pretty. But he told his brothers twice, 45, of Genesis, the 5th through the 7th verse, and in the 50th chapter, in the 20th verse. As for you, ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to save much people as it is this day. And that is the way I seen my life develop. My son died about 5 years before I got out of prison, the only son I had. I got 2 daughters, one's here, one's over in Titusville. I have been blessed to be in their life and have a part with my grandchildren and great-grandchildren now. And I know that it is part of what God intended for me. Since I have been out, I got involved in ministry, prison ministry, and I've been in prisons all over the state of Florida. Go in there and we go out on the compound, and the guys come out, and we were able to talk, and that's what I tell them about how God intervened in my life and what He's done with it. So I'm out now. I have spoke at churches. I had an opportunity to pastor a small church here, but that's hard work. That's 24/7. And pastor job wasn't for me. I'd try anything except prison. So I do that, and I have spoken churches. I go into prison and into schools where I can. After Gary spoke for me and got me paroled for less than 4 years later, which is totally, at that time, was the shortest period of time anyone had ever been able to get off of parole. I had 3 life sentence parole, and I was off of it. I was going into prison. They knew what I was doing. And that's what I teach other young men to do. I mentor them to that. I go speak at many of the parole hearings in Tallahassee. Gary went with me on a couple, well, mine, and then with one of our local guys who's been in there a while too, that I'm trying to help. But the one thing that I have learned and that I've told them now I didn't do to start with, I speak for Christians. I'm sorry, my statistical evidence shows me that the best chance of not recidivizing is Christian. People who have a walk with the Lord find their life is lived in a different way. They can talk all they want to, but when they get out here, they get turned around. And I've had a few of them that's happened to me. So I don't speak for anyone who is not a Christian, but I still do a lot of it. And I have no idea how many I spoke for that has been paroled, but I can assure you it's over 100. I spoke for one kid, was 15 years old, shotgunned his dad to death. He was a terrible abuser, an alcoholic, beat the wife till she left, and this one kid was left to suffer the abuse. And at 15, he shotgunned his dad to death. He did 27 years. He's out and very involved in a big ministry called Kairos. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but it's a Christian organization that goes into the prisons and shares with inmates. And he is next to the head one now in the area over around Tampa. There are others who are doing the same thing. Their names are not important. What's important to me is to always be able to speak of Jesus Christ. When Gary called me and told me he had talked with Kenny about coming and speaking, what he had got from Kenny, whether I wanted to be involved, I said I always take every opportunity that I get to speak about Jesus Christ, because that changed my life. And it's changed my life and my family. What I don't see yet, I still count on, because it's about faith in all of it. My neighbor up in Chipley, she has cried a number of times about her grandchildren and the way the world looked, particularly after the last election, not with Trump, the other one. And she was crying, and she just thought the world was going to end, I guess. And I asked her, I said, "Did you pray for him?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Do you believe God can do it?" Yes. Well, then what are you crying about? My children will tell you, I don't fear anything. Every day's good. Every moment's good. I don't have a problem because I have learned that Jesus Christ gave me a road back to the Heavenly Father and that He's got it all. So that when I done 40 years, came out, my son was dead and gone. My wife, his mother, would die a couple years after I got out, long past married, but I got to see her. And the other, she had died 7 years before that. But I know with that all of this, that God has a plan. I talked it so much. Rube Waddell and I, he came up with a thing. He wanted to do 30 minutes. He wanted to do a third book. And the whole thing was going to be, what 40 years of your life would you give up? And I said, it'll have to be, what 40 years of your life would you give up to know that you and your family would be together in bliss through eternity? He died before it was finished. Working with Gary, in time, hopefully we'll have something out that will better explain all of this. But I wanted to be able to say tonight, as I told Gary, Jesus Christ is the answer. Thank you.